vegan, I'm going to be demonstrating how I make my cinnamon rolls. Christmas morning, this is a favorite in our house, and usually I don't measure anything. So tonight what I'm doing is I'm showing you a recipe. I practiced it, I measured it out so that you'll be able to get the same results that I get. Also, I froze some of the unbaked cinnamon rolls, and then I refrigerated some of the unbaked cinnamon rolls to also show you that if you need to prepare this ahead of time so that you can just pop it in the oven Christmas morning, I'll show you the results. Before I make my dough, I make my cinnamon and brown sugar mixture to go on the cinnamon rolls. You could use white sugar, but I prefer the flavor of brown sugar. And before I start getting messy in the dough, I don't know if you ever have sleeves that won't stay up, but what I do is I put a rubber band on my sleeve and then I just push it up, and it'll keep my sleeve out of my way while I'm preparing food. So this is softened vegan butter, it's cinnamon, and I want this to be a paste. And sometimes I have to microwave it just 5 seconds. I do not want this to get liquid. I just want it pasty and spreadable. It was easier for me to pick the bowl up. Now, as you can see, that's fairly spreadable. However, I want it just a little bit softer. So I will microwave it for really just a few seconds. I'll be right back. Okay, that was actually 2 seconds. You can see it started to melt. Don't want it melted all the way, but I want it very, very soft and spreadable. And if you overdo that, just put it in your refrigerator and let it firm up a little bit. Now, the next thing I do before I make actual dough is I make my glaze, because I want this glaze to go on when the cinnamon rolls are very hot. So this is my powdered sugar, this is milk and vanilla, of course vegan milk. And really, you can see, so simple. You're just going to stir that together. You want to get all of your ingredients ready so that when those pop out of the oven, you can put the glaze on them and you can serve them. Now, you're going to notice this is a pretty thick glaze, but we're putting it on hot cinnamon rolls. So we're going to want that to melt as it goes on. Well, I'm just going to add another drop of water. It's a tiny bit thick, but normally 1 cup of powdered sugar, 1 tablespoon plus 1 teaspoon of vegan milk, and it makes it the consistency I want. You want it like that. You may have to add another teaspoon of water too. Now it's time to make the dough. This is my Bisquick. I have 2 1/4 cups of Bisquick in here, and this is 2/3 cup of plant-based milk. Now, if you look on your Bisquick container, you'll see that it is vegan. And the other thing is, this recipe, this is for their drop biscuit recipe. So stir it up. It's going to be a little bit sticky for rolling out, but that's what's different about my cinnamon rolls. They're not perfectly shaped. They're almost free form. And what that does is it makes these biscuits and these cinnamon rolls so moist. When you're making a biscuit or any shortbread, you don't want to overmix. So I'm just mixing enough to get those ingredients in. And you can see it's a little bit sticky. That's fine. You'll see why in a minute. I will be rolling my dough out on a piece of parchment paper, and I put down about 2 tablespoons of Bisquick. Spread it out just a little bit. Take your dough. You might have to just dump it out. I flatten it a tiny bit, just getting it shaped into a rectangle. And then I take another about 2 tablespoons of Bisquick. Now I'm going to start to just pat this dough out. Keep trying to keep it rectangular, and I do not even use a rolling pin. That's because that dough is so soft, you can just keep patting it. Now the size that I'm going for is 12 inches by about 7.5 inches. Let's see how we're doing. Okay, it's 11.5 by 7, so I'm just gonna pat it just a little bit more. Okay, I've got my 12 inches and I have about 7.5. Now this extra Bisquick, just try to brush it off because it makes it harder to put the cinnamon butter mixture on there. Now at this point, if you really like raisins, you could even put raisins in here. If you do the raisins, I suggest that you plump them up before you put them in. And that means that you would soak them in water so they start hydrating again. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm going to wash my hands and then I will start rolling this dough up. At this point, I just put the extra Bisquick up now. I shake it up there, and usually I roll it towards myself, but I want you to be able to see it better on camera, so I'm rolling it away from myself. And I will let you know, sometimes it sticks to the parchment. If it does, just be gentle with it and scrape it up a little bit. If I was scraping it up, I would be using something like this underneath to help lift it. I'm not getting too much sticking right now, but it could still happen. And then I bring this last piece over towards myself. And you can see there's a couple little stickies. Press this together, and I tried to get the Bisquick, the flour Bisquick off the top. I'm just brushing some of that off. I'm rolling it a little bit more to myself so the seam side is down. Again, I'm going to wash my hands. Now I'm sliding this onto my baking sheet. Now this is going to be the part that's a little bit different from other cinnamon rolls. Years ago, a friend of mine named Cindy said that her grandmother and her mother always left the cinnamon rolls on their side. I'm going to actually bake these on the parchment that we rolled them out on. I'm spreading them out. They will get nice and puffy. And I'm going to wish you were in my kitchen as these are baking. That one could be 3. I'm going to make it 3. Because sometimes somebody wants just a little piece. Whoops. Put that little piece of biscuit on there. These are ready to go into a preheated 375-degree oven. The next thing that I want to show you is the frozen and the refrigerated, and we can see how they work out. Now this one was in the freezer and I brought it up to room temperature. I would recommend that if you're going to freeze it, provided this experiment works out, that you bring it up to about a room temperature. And I'm going to write frozen here so we know which is which. Now it's still pretty cold and it's not as puffy as the dough that I just made that we're baking right away. I'll make that one 3. Whoops, I keep wanting to slide them over, but because they look prettier like that, but really they taste better this way. Now this is the dough that's been in my refrigerator. So if you were making this the night before, open it up. Looks like it might need shaped a tiny bit. And on this one, I'll just write refrig. Now these ones over here that are frozen, they're pretty cold, and I'm going to suspect they might have to bake longer. Also, the ones in the refrigerator, the sugar was changing to some liquid. We'll see, but I hope this works out. I certainly get up early enough to make them fresh that morning, but it would be sure convenient to be able to just slice and bake. Okay, everything's going into the oven now, and I will come back when they're baked. Cinnamon rolls are finished. I'm going to brush off a little bit of that Bisquick that didn't bake in before I glaze them. And I know they're done. They're not very browned, but when I push them and tap on them, they have the kind of a hollow sound. And you can see how nicely that glaze melts over them. And these have just come out of the oven. That's when I want to glaze them. Putting it on there to let it melt a little bit. These ended up baking probably about 15 minutes. And as you can see, they're not like beautiful in appearance, but they're so moist. They're not dry at all in any way, shape, or form. Now, a biscuit kind of cinnamon roll, you need to eat that right away. They don't reheat or taste that special once they've cooled, or maybe they're a couple hours old. Now, some people like nuts on theirs, so I'm going to put a few nuts on. You're going to have to do this while the glaze is still wet. And you can see I'm pressing it in a little bit. Now, I'm not putting too many with nuts because my family actually prefers them without the nuts. But I wanted you to see what they would look like. These were frozen, these were refrigerated. Now for our experiment, I think the frozen ones were better. These are a little bit messy. I'm going to still go ahead and glaze them. So that's how it looks. When you break it, it's still nice and fluffy inside. This was the refrigerator one. I'll give it a little taste for you. I'm trying to get a little glaze. That tastes very good. So even though it's not as pretty as the other ones, if you needed to do that the night before, you could. This is the frozen one. That's how it looks. I believe the frozen one is actually better than the refrigerated one. Then this is the one that was baked immediately. They all have a similar texture. However, the one made fresh is definitely better than the other two. These would be okay if your family was not used to eating these. Now for plating them, I think this bowl is so beautiful that I'm going to use it for this. It's from a friend. Nicole gave it to us, and Matt. You can look just how pretty that looks. Many times the way you serve something increases its eye appeal. So there you have it. I hope you'll come back next week. I'll be reading the Christmas story and show you how we serve this and start our morning with the story right out of the Bible telling the birth of Jesus Christ. God bless you, and I hope to see you next week. This is the morning after I made those cinnamon rolls for you, and I wanted to show you, if you have leftovers, how to heat them up so that they taste great. This is how I stored them, and they get pretty soft overnight. So I'm going to do them in my Ninja. Just carefully pick them up. And maybe if Christmas morning is really rushed for you, you will just want to make them ahead of time. This is all that I'm heating for right now because they taste better when they're freshly heated. This is popping them into my Ninja fryer. I'm going with bake setting 375 for about 8 minutes. Well, here they are, ready to serve again. So there you can get a close look. It actually only took about 5 minutes. Here's the ones with the nut. So if you have leftovers, don't be tempted to just pop it into the microwave. Putting it in a Ninja toaster or your oven really makes them taste much better leftover. Again, Merry Christmas!